Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little different today.
Yeah.
Usually we're looking at tech trends or psychology, history, but today we are looking at a map. And not the map you see on your GPS.
Or hanging in a classroom? No.
Exactly. We're taking a stack of research, some pretty heavy demographic data from the Joshua Project, and this a very confronting missiological manuscript called Where There Is No Gospel.
It's a heavy stack today. And I'll be honest, when I first read through this stuff,
Yeah.
it was, well, it is a bit disorienting.
It is.
It really forces you to look at the world differently.
It does, because we're going to try and dismantle a very specific, very modern illusion. It's this idea that because we live in a world of hyperconnectivity,
Right.
where you have Starlink satellites orbiting overhead and you can FaceTime a coffee shop in Tokyo from a basement in Seattle, that surely, by now, the Christian message is accessible everywhere.
It's the connectivity myth. That's
Yeah.
what I call it. We assume that because we can reach anyone digitally, the gospel can reach anyone spiritually.
Mhm.
So if someone hasn't become a Christian in, 2024, we just assume it's because they've heard it, considered it, and swiped left.
Right, they said no thanks. We see it as a rejection issue.
Exactly.
But the source material just flat out argues this is statistically and structurally false. We are diving into the distinction between being lost and being unreached.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, before reading this, I thought these were just two different, churchy words for the same thing. But they're not synonyms.
Not at all. And mixing them up is what the author calls a fatal strategic error. Okay, it's the difference between a man dying of thirst in a room full of bottled water that he refuses to drink,
Okay.
and a man dying of thirst in a desert where there is simply no water.
Okay, that sets the stakes pretty high.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to uncover this invisible majority. And we are talking about 3.5 billion people.
Yeah.
That number is staggering. It's almost half the planet.
It's a hard number to process. It really is. It just turns people into statistics.
And these 3.5 billion people, according to this research, have no realistic chance, zero, of hearing the Christian message. So we need to figure out why they are hidden, what barriers are keeping them there.
And why the text claims that modern mission strategy has largely drifted away from them.
It changes how you see the map.
Once you see this distinction, you really can't unsee it.
So let's start with definitions, because I think for a lot of listeners, lost and unreached just sound like jargon. But the author draws a hard line.
It's a line of access. That's the key. Think of it this way. The lost are defined as individuals who have access to the message, but for whatever reason, haven't responded.
Okay, so let's make that concrete.
Yeah.
My neighbor, he lives 3 blocks from a church. He has a smartphone. He knows I'm a Christian, but he thinks religion is nonsense.
Right.
He's happy living his life without it.
He is lost by this definition. He's spiritual, separated from God, yes, but he has access.
He has the choice.
He has the agency to reject the message. He can walk down the street, ask a pastor a question. He can buy a Bible on Amazon and have it delivered tomorrow. The resources are.
Yeah.
They're in his blast radius.
Okay, so lost implies the presence of a choice. He has the tools, he just isn't using them.
Precisely. Now contrast that with unreached. The source defines an unreached people group as a community where there is no indigenous church, no access to scripture in their language, and no believer nearby to explain the message.
So it's not about rejection at all.
No, it's about absence. And that's the aha moment the text really highlights. It calls it the quiet reality. For these billions of people, belief isn't a decision that's waiting to be made. It's an option they have never, ever been offered.
The source used this analogy that I found honestly really haunting. It described a village maybe high in the mountains of Central Asia or a river delta in the Amazon. And in this village, life just happens. Babies are born, couples get married, businesses run, elders pass away. The whole cycle of life unfolds without the name of Jesus ever being spoken with meaning.
That distinction with meaning
Yeah.
is so crucial. They might hear the name as a curse word in some pirated Western movie,
Sure.
Or they might know Christians as those people over the mountain who eat pork or Western political agents. But they never hear the actual message of grace or redemption in a way that makes any sense to them culturally or linguistically. They live and die in a vacuum of that specific knowledge.
And we are not just talking about a few isolated tribes in the jungle, right? I think that's the stereotype.
Fifth helmets and canoes.
Yeah, hacking through vines. But the data here is drawn from the Joshua Project, which is this massive database.
Right. This isn't just National Geographic stuff. The Joshua Project identifies over 7,100 unreached people groups.
7,100 distinct cultural groups.
Yes.
That's a lot of distinct cultures.
It is, and that's what
Yeah.
totals up to that 3.5 billion number. And while some are remote tribes, many are massive populations in major cities. The vast majority reside in what missiologists call the 1040 window.
Which is that rectangular chunk of the map. It stretches across North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia.
Exactly, from West Africa all the way across to Japan. That's where the density of this invisible majority lives. It's the heartland of Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, and it's where the church is, well, statistically almost non-existent.
So if this is such a huge number, half the world, and the distinction is so clear in the data, why do we miss it? Why does the average person, even the average churchgoer, assume the job is, mostly done?
Well, the source material argues that we miss it because we misunderstand the Bible itself, specifically how we read the word nations.
Okay.
This is where we have to get a little linguistic, but stay with me because it really changes the whole picture. In English, when we hear nations, what do you think of?
I think of the Olympics, the parade of nations, flags, borders, France, Japan, Brazil,
Sure.
seats at the UN.
Right. So when the mandate says make disciples of all nations, we look at a political map. We think, okay, there are missionaries in India. There are churches in China. There are believers in Nigeria. Check. The nation is reached.
But the text says that's the wrong unit of measurement.
Completely wrong. The Greek word used in the New Testament is ethnos.
Ethnos, okay, like ethnic.
Exactly. That's where we get the word. It doesn't refer to a country with borders and a flag because, frankly, most modern countries didn't exist back then.
Right.
Ethnos refers to a distinct people group, one bound together by language, culture, and heritage.
So a single geopolitical country like India isn't just one nation in the biblical sense.
Not at all. India is composed of hundreds, maybe thousands, of ethnic. You might have the gospel flourishing in the south among one language group, while 1,000 miles north, a completely different tribe with a different language has zero contact with Christianity.
The source uses this really vivid metaphor. The gospel must enter the cultural bloodstream of a people.
It's a great image. Think of a country like a body. Just because the medicine, the gospel, is in the arm doesn't mean it has reached the leg if there's a tourniquet in between. Just because there's a church in the capital city, maybe among the educated elite who speak English, doesn't mean the message has entered the bloodstream of a linguistically isolated agricultural group in the same country.
That really reframes the mandate. It changes it from cover the map to penetrate the culture.
Precisely. And the text points to the Apostle Paul as the architect of this whole strategy, specifically Romans 15:20. This is the anchor verse for the whole argument.
I have that marked here. Paul writes, "It has always been my ambition to preach the gospel where Christ was not known, so that I would not be building on someone else's foundation."
See, Paul wasn't just wandering around aimlessly. He had a specific logic. He didn't want to build where a foundation was already laid.
He was actively seeking the void.
Yes, he was looking for the blank spots. Spiritual blank spots. He was obsessed with the frontier. And this connects to a Greek concept the source brings up, dikaiosina.
Okay, let's unpack that. Usually that's translated as righteousness, right? Which sounds like being a good person, moral behavior.
Don't lie, don't steal. Yeah, that's how we usually hear it in a Western individualistic context, me being good.
Right.
But the source argues that in the context of mission and the New Testament, dikaiosina is better understood as active justice.
Active justice.
It's the idea that God's righteousness moves outward to restore things to how they should be. So, providing access to the gospel, for those who've never heard, isn't just a charity project. It's an issue of justice.
That is a huge shift. You're saying it's not just nice to share it, it's actually unjust not to.
Exactly. The argument is that it is unjust for some people to have 10 versions of the Bible, radio stations, podcasts, and churches on every corner, while others have zero access. It's unjust to hoard the access.
Wow.
If you have the cure for a disease during a plague, and you keep it in your own neighborhood while the next town over dies, that's not just uncharitable, it's unrighteous.
Access is a moral category. That hits hard. But I want to push back on this access idea for a second. We mentioned Starlink earlier. We live in the 21st century.
Sure.
The source talks about the illusion of access. Why is it an illusion? If I'm in that village in the mountains, can't I just Google, who is Jesus?
This is a really common objection. It's what the text calls the digital mirage. There's this assumption that connectivity equals access. But there are two massive problems with that. First, algorithms.
The algorithm knows what I want before I do.
Exactly, but it only feeds you what you already interact with. Algorithms don't plant churches. They reinforce biases. If you are in a culture that is 100% Muslim or Hindu, and all your friends are and all your searches are related to that context,
So your algorithm isn't going to randomly serve you a Christian sermon.
no way. You live in a digital echo chamber. So the internet actually mirrors the isolation of the village.
Wow. Okay.
But the second problem is even deeper. It's the heart language issue. You can have a smartphone in your hand, but if the only content available about Jesus is in English,
Right.
or a national trade language that you use for bargaining at the market but don't really feel,
It won't land. It feels foreign.
right, it feels like a white man's religion, or a foreign import. It feels like homework. It doesn't speak to your soul. Social media doesn't automatically translate scripture into a heart language that resonates with your childhood memories, your idioms, your deep emotional life. That takes people.
So proximity, digital or physical, is not the same as penetration.
Exactly. And the source also critiques what it calls the urban bias. We measure success by urban megachurches. If there's a thriving church in Nairobi or Bangkok, we mark the country as reached.
But that capital city is often westernized, cosmopolitan. It's worlds apart from the rural, tribal areas.
It's like saying New York City represents all of rural Appalachia.
Or worse.
It is worse. It's like saying New York represents a tribe in the Amazon just because they're on the same continent. The cultural distance is massive.
There's another term that tripped me up at first. Diaspora confusion.
Oh, this is a big one. It's the idea that just because we see people from a certain group in London or New York, we assume their home is reached.
Okay.
You might have a Kurdish community in Nashville, which actually has a huge Kurdish population, and they might have access to the gospel there.
So we see them, we see a church near them, and we think, okay, check. The Kurds are reached.
Exactly. We conflate the migrant with the homeland. But the village back in the mountains of Kurdistan, it's still completely cut off. The access in Nashville doesn't transmit by osmosis to the mountains of Iraq.
So we have these illusions masking the problem. But let's look at the actual walls. The source details specific structural barriers. This isn't just about people being uninterested, it's about them being blocked.
They list 4 main walls, and these are formidable. The first, which we touched on, is language. But it's not just translation, it's literacy.
Right, because the default strategy is give them a Bible, print more books.
But so many unreached groups are oral cultures. They don't read, or they don't read for learning, they read for receipts. Handing them a dense book is like handing them a paperweight. They need stories, audio, oral tradition.
So the medium itself is a barrier. If we send books to a listening culture, we've missed.
Huge miss. The second wall is geography. We can't ignore physics. Some of these groups live in the high Himalayas, or on tiny islands, or deep in the jungle. Physical isolation makes sustained contact incredibly difficult. You can't just drive there for Sunday service.
Then you have the legal and political wall.
Closed countries. Places where conversion is criminalized. Places where you can go to jail for possessing a Bible or preaching. This creates a massive barrier to entry for traditional missionaries. You can't just apply for a missionary visa. It doesn't exist.
And the fourth one, which I found the most fascinating and probably the hardest to overcome, is the cultural social hostility wall.
The social wall. This is where the barrier is internal. In these contexts, following Christ is viewed not just as a religious change, but as treason.
Treason against who?
Against your ancestors, your clan, your identity. In many tribal or close-knit religious communities, your religion is your ethnicity. To change one is to betray the other. So the social structure itself actively blocks the message to preserve the tribe's cohesion.
So when you combine all of these, language, geography, law, and culture, you realize that for 3.5 billion people, the gospel is effectively embargoed.
Precisely. It's not refused, it's blocked. And that distinction changes everything about how you approach the problem.
Which brings us to the critique section of the source material, and it gets a little spicy here. The text basically accuses modern ministry of mission drift.
It frames it as attraction versus obedience. The natural human tendency, and let's be honest, organizational tendency, is to drift toward what is visible, measurable, and convenient. We drift toward attraction.
We want the big numbers. We want the photos of the packed stadium to put in the newsletter. It feels like momentum.
Right, it feels like success. But the source argues true mission is about obedience to the mandate to go where the name is not known. And that is often invisible, slow, and dangerous.
It talks about the preference paradigm, that decisions on where to send people are often made based on safety, climate, ease of access.
I'd rather go to Costa Rica than a war zone in the desert.
Yeah.
And look, that's human nature. Who doesn't want to be safe? Who doesn't want their kids to be safe?
Of course.
But the consequence, as the text points out, is redundancy. We end up with workers piling on top of each other in places that are already reached.
Oh, wow.
Places that have churches, seminaries, and resources, while the frontier peoples are completely ignored.
The text used a medical analogy here that really clarified it for me. It's like 10 ambulances showing up to a house with a scraped knee while a house on fire across town gets 0.
That is a perfect, if painful, analogy. We are over-resourcing the reached and under-resourcing the unreached. And the source contrasts this with historical figures, Paul, obviously, but also people like Patrick in Ireland or Hudson Taylor in China.
Hudson Taylor was the one who famously went inland, right?
Yes. In the 19th century, nearly all the missionaries in China were staying in the coastal ports, where it was safe, where there was trade, where it was essentially British. He looked at the map and said, there are millions inland who have never heard. He prioritized the frontier over the familiar.
So we have identified the problem. We have the data, the barriers, the drift. What is the path forward? The source doesn't just leave us in the dumps. It outlines a strategy for reforming mission imagination.
It calls for a shift from passive concern to active engagement, and it outlines 3 strategic pillars: prayer, giving, and going, but not in the generic sense we usually hear in church.
Right, let's break that down because prayer usually means God bless the missionaries. It's a bit vague.
Exactly. The source calls for moving from generic prayer to specific informed intercession, using data, praying for the Balak people of Pakistan by name, praying against the specific barriers we just discussed.
So praying for a breakthrough in the literacy barrier or for a specific legal door to open.
Yes. Treating prayer like intelligence work, using the map.
Strategic prayer.
Then there's giving. The text argues we need to stop funding just visibility projects and start funding access ministries.
What's the difference?
A visibility project is something you can take a picture of. A new building. An event. A concert. An access project is often invisible. It's translation work that takes 20 years and happens in a basement. It's developing oral scripture sets. It's supporting business professionals in closed countries who can't show their faces in a newsletter because it would compromise their security.
So it means allocating resources to the places where the ROI might look low in the short term, but the need is strictly access.
Correct. Investing in the plumbing, not just the facade. It takes a lot of maturity to give to something you might never see a photo of.
And finally, going and sending.
The emphasis here is on long-term incarnational presence. The text is pretty critical of what you might call religious tourism.
The 2-week trip to paint a fence.
Right. It says that might be good for your personal growth or for feeling good, but it doesn't reach unreached peoples. Breaking the language and culture barrier takes years, maybe decades. We need to send people to live in the culture, learn the language, and stay until the job is done.
And done has a specific definition here, too. The goal isn't just getting a few converts. It's creating Laos.
Yes. Laos is the Greek word for people. The goal is creating a people of God.
Yeah.
An indigenous, self-reproducing church that can lead itself.
So we are not trying to set up a franchise of a Western church.
No. That's the colonial mistake.
Yeah.
The goal is to plant the seed so deeply that if all the missionaries left tomorrow, the church would keep growing. It would have its own leaders, its own worship style, its own Bible, in its own language.
And once that exists...
Once that exists, the people are reached. Even if not everyone believes, access is established because the church is there, speaking the language, part of the culture.
It's a massive shift in perspective. It moves the goalposts from activity, how busy are we, to access, who can actually hear.
And it forces us to grapple with that question of justice we started with. If we truly believe this message is vital, life and death vital, how can we be okay with 3.5 billion people being structurally cut off from it?
It really makes you rethink everything about how we view global history, current events. You stop looking at countries and start looking at peoples.
And you stop assuming that connectivity equals truth. Just because the world is wired doesn't mean the truth is known. It takes real intentionality to cross those barriers.
So what does this all mean for the listener, whether they are deeply involved in this stuff or just hearing it for the first time?
I think it offers a lens of responsibility. It's not about guilt. It's about awareness. Once you know that lost and unreached are different, You can't unknow it.
Right.
You have to ask yourself, am I supporting the maintenance of the found or the reaching of the lost?
It moves you from a passive observer to someone who has to reckon with the geography of faith.
Exactly.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought from the text. It's a question that I think we should just leave hanging in the air.
It's a question of culpability. The text asks, what does obedience look like when you know there are still places where Christ has not been named and you are no longer unaware?
That is a heavy, beautiful question to end on. We're going to let you chew on that. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
That was a pleasure.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.